Are we splitting hairs, or do you truly believe that it's not a gambling product?
It's not a gambling product. It is it's a financial instrument. Like you're trading contracts. It's a CFTC regulated product. You could say the same thing about fantasy sports. Is it betting on something? Sure.
Okay, welcome back to yet another edition of the Business of Betting podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Edelstein, senior analyst at ingame.com. I'm joined today by Seth Young, CEO of High Roller. Seth, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today.
Afternoon, Jeff. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I've always wanted to do this show. I listen religiously. I love it. I'm so excited.
Oh, awesome. We appreciate that. Hopefully we live up to the hype. I mean, you're in good hands. You got a very smart, funny, talented, and modest host. So I think we'll be all right.
That's great. It's a perfect counterbalance for me.
All right. I want to start with the new news with you guys, diving into the prediction market world. The first question I have, and as someone again, you guys you announced this about less than a month ago, I guess, that you're partnering with crypto.com for the prediction markets. Do you feel like the answer is obviously no, you don't. But I'm starting to wonder, is this area starting to get a little, I think this is a Wall Street term, frothy? Everyone wants in and everyone's getting in.
Frothy, it's not a bad word to describe it. It's definitely an interesting space. And I think it's actually quite much bigger than people give it credit for. This is my opinion now. I think, consumer consumption habits are shifting. The next generation and my generation, our generation, we like interesting products. I think the next generation is pretty comfortable with financial products, just coming from a crypto world, comfortable with risk in a different way than traditional gambling. Yeah, I think it's going to be quite big. And frothy is interesting. The competitive landscape is filled with big players. These big players have different kinds of products integrated alongside a prediction market product value proposition. And there are different reasons for different companies to get into the market, for sure. I think it's, for the first time, I was talking to my mother about this, of all people, and for the first time in my career, I can't look at something and tell you exactly what's going to happen. I think this one can go in so many different directions, all of which I think are super exciting to talk about. But from my perspective, as it relates to High Roller, this was a really interesting thing for us to do in the context of being one of the, if not the only public company that's, I guess, not named FanDuel or DraftKings, where investors can find exposure to the space, but also as it relates to our longer term strategic interests in regulated markets like the United States, which is the largest regulating market in the world. So standalone, amazing, interesting product with so many interesting possibilities. And longer term, look at it like this. If FanDuel and DraftKings grew in such a way in the early 2010s with an interesting legal product, and Underdog and Prize Picks did the same thing, and let's say the next wave, we have a third wave of opportunity for companies like High Roller to get to scale and ostensibly become a major player in gaming in general, with its regulated online casino, regulated online sportsbook. So possibilities are infinite. It's really, really interesting.
You mentioned one of the few companies outside of FanDuel and DraftKings where investors, can get in on this. A bit of a wild ride for the stock since this announcement. I mean, the stock was trading, I was looking before, $2, $3 range, fired its way to the high 20s, and then it's pulled back a little bit. How much of the day-to-day movement of that, is on your concern, or is it just the whims of the market?
Concern's an interesting word. It's a very nuanced question, Jeff. I think it requires talking a little bit about the background of High Roller and, how we got from point A to point B and how we're going from, say, point B to point Z now, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to talk about what High Roller does later, or what it has been doing later, but why don't you jump in, save me the question.
It's definitely relevant to the stock run-up. And I don't think I'm going to say anything here that anybody that's been a student of public markets won't know, but it is pretty interesting, right? So the good news is that we have a tremendous amount of belief in what we're doing, the deals that we've made, the things that we've announced. Right now, we're really working to execute against getting those things to market and delivering on our promises. And I have no concern that we'll be able to do that. If you go back to the company's origin, it was operating for a few years and then IPO'd in October of 2024, largely founder held. This is going to be somewhat long-winded, but I promise I will answer the question. Largely founder held. It's called about 70% held by insiders. And then Q1 was tough. Q1 25 was tough. Q2, we installed a new management team. We effectively turned the business around, streamlined costs, and started transforming it from what it was into what it's becoming. Along the way, as a PLC, especially micro cap and small cap, it's a really difficult space to be in. It's been a tremendous learning curve, I think, for a lot of us that maybe had some experience with larger companies. And in some ways, the fundamentals don't matter until they do. So if you ask me about my day-to-day concern around the stock, that varies day to day. But Q2, we had a good results. We of 25, we had a great adjusted EBITDA positive result in the context of shuttering markets. Q3 was even better. We eked out a modest profit, and we filed what's called a shelf mechanic. S3, it's a new share issue. It's how we did the capital raise in a registered direct share offering. But we were out of compliance for some time with our NYSE listing requirements, which put us under what's called a baby shelf. It means you can effectively only raise a certain amount of capital as a percentage of your market cap. Without boring you with all the details, there was definitely a thesis here for how we could accelerate our growth and take down the kind of capital that we'd be looking for in order to execute on all these exciting things and actually get a lot of different kinds of upside and flexibility. The long story extremely short is that, a tight float paired with not a lot of sellers that, especially with insiders that are extremely bullish on what we're doing, paired with the rabid sentiment around prediction markets, really drove us up. So we thought we were doing a great deal. We're super excited about it. We kept it pretty tight, and the market seemed to respond to that. We announced a few interesting partnerships around it for distribution. We announced some sports betting product that we're adding to round out our product suite in some of our core markets for our core business. We announced a strategic investment, a nominal one from Saratoga, which is interesting. And we managed to find ourselves out of the baby shelf. We were able to sort of regain that. We regained our listing compliance prior to that, but we were able to get out of this. And so what you saw, we culminated with a new share issue, raised $25 million. We couldn't be more excited about it. We're all really proud of the work that we put in for it. Now it's just time to execute. Proof is in the pudding next, right? So a lot to do, but a great team and really exciting process.
Speaking of this, staying on the prediction markets for another minute or two here. I can't imagine that we're going to look up in 5-10 years. Let's say it's everything to the moon, right? The court says, yes, prediction markets are everywhere, blah, blah, blah. I have a hard time thinking that the 24 or so companies in the space right now, like that there's 24 companies when we look up, right? That's generally not the way these things work. You see it in sports betting and online casino, there's a big two, right? And then there's kind of sort of like a next level 2 or 3, and then there's like the laggards. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there's probably as many online sports betting and casino operations have gone out of business since past, but that have still around. What do you see as like the secret to, whether it be you guys or you name it, Gemini or Polymarket or whoever, to like getting past this first mover and like being the go-to down the road?
I feel like you're going to have a lot of great questions that are really difficult to answer. I'm going to try, right? So it's not shocking that, you have really interesting companies that are entering a really interesting space, and every company is different. So for us, we have in our pocket, one of the more interesting, unique selling points for a business like High Roller is that, our founders, part of our founding team are founders of a business called Spike Up Media. Spike Up have quietly or not so quietly been one of the more prolific user acquisition lead generation firms in gaming and other verticals as an affiliate. They're really, really good. Right. So we have a strong level of comfort and confidence in their ability, and we do our marketing through them. The alignment is that close. We have a strong level of comfort and confidence that they're going to be delivering to us in the regulated markets that we're entering for online casino, like Ontario, Alberta, Finland, but also the prediction market space where they've definitely been keeping their eyes on this. So it's interesting because we're talking about two different games, right? We're talking about the public markets as a publicly traded company with a stock, and we're talking about the competitive landscape, and those things can be mutually exclusive, right? So there aren't a whole lot of companies like ours that have this, in my view, the kind of upside that one would want in the gaming business and the prediction market business. I remember when I was at PointsBet, not to get off track, but we were public on the ASX. We'd go around, we'd talk about being a pure play in the United States. And that was largely true. We didn't have any international drag. We had a business in Australia that was doing quite well. And, the investment thesis for people that were interested in the business was that we were playing on pure upside in the United States. And in some ways, that's really almost identical for High Roller. We did 20 million through Q3 of 2025. I think we're reporting in a month or so, month and change. But in effect, if you look at the market size for what we're addressing and market size for prediction markets and then forward looking, it is effectively a pure play. And that makes us different than just about than most all of the competitors in the space. It's hard to compete with big B2Cs with big budgets, but we also have a pretty narrow focus. And it's part of the reason that we went and transformed the business from a wider operating profile without a lot of focus into something that is tightened. The narrowed focus is definitely something that has helped our team come together more cohesively. We're executing really well. We streamlined everything internally. And the last 6-ish months, we've been preparing for the kind of scale that we're now anticipating with a product like this and in some of the markets that we're entering.
For those that don't know, why don't you give me the 2 sentence what High Roller was doing mostly before all of this?
Yeah, sure. Fine. High Roller, by the way, one of the best brands. I've been in the gaming business 20 plus years, and this is like the best brand I've ever seen. You don't have to tell people what it is. It's a gaming brand. We have a multi-brand strategy. I guess the other brand I really like is called Fruta, Spanish for fruit. Really interesting read-throughs for potential Latin American expansion or playful brand. But we were historically only operating online casino in a select amount of markets. And so, the most recent announcements we've made, like our sports betting relationship that's impending with Altenar, or the one with Crypto.com for prediction markets, it is following our narrative. Now, okay, we're ready. We're ready to diversify our product base, ready to diversify our geographic operating profile. We have the tools. We've shown, look, as a growth company too, you don't necessarily want to focus on profitable operations. You want to focus on growth, but we've shown that we can operate profitably. And now it's time for us to grow again in a different way, where we have stable and protected revenue streams, regulated markets for iGaming, for sports betting. And for me, the prediction market space, one of the most fascinating, I guess, legal, what's the word I'm looking for? It's such an interesting legal thing in the United States. As somebody who's a nerd for gambling and the law, just because something is legal doesn't mean it's not controversial. This is very objectively legal, but it's such an interesting thing politically. With all that said, super excited. It's going to be a really interesting ride.
On the casino side of the business, you guys are what's, with a wave of a hand in America called unregulated, right? Because I dipped into a little Donald Trump there. that wasn't even intentional. But your product's not available in the States, correct?
No. So we're not operating in any, we have an Estonia license where we operate in a number of markets, and we're in the application process in the number of markets that we've already set.
And what's interesting about that is I know Canada is one of them, right?
Yeah, so we're in the midst of the process in Ontario, a huge market, right? And we've stated that we intend to get into Alberta. And so, that licensing process kicked off, a week and a half ago.
Is there any idea or hope or movement, or it's not worth the trouble to try to go state by state here, in America to get licensed? Well, the 7 states that have it, mind you.
So the 7 states that have it are interesting states, right? A couple of them are inaccessible because it's lottery monopolies, or it's just an artificially limited license landscape. But look, we haven't announced anything, but I don't think it's unfair to suggest that going into a space like prediction markets is a great way to gain brand awareness, scale of audience. I look at it like this, Jeff. For me right now, I view best case scenario with our US prediction market entry as an opportunity for us to gain scale of audience, brand recognition. And in a perfect world, we're driving enough volume that the revenue is material, right? I see the worst case scenario. Well, worst case scenario is everything goes to zero, but that seems very difficult for me to foresee. For us, I see the worst case scenario as gaining scale of audience. Everything else is sort of TBD. We can opine on what might happen between now and then, what the actual unit economics look like. It is pretty nascent. We do have some great data, and that's why we are confident. But let's say, worst case, we get great scale of audience. Look at what other groups have done successfully in the past. As long as we do the right thing, as long as we continue to operate with integrity, I find it difficult to foresee a scenario where we wouldn't have opportunities to enter a regulated market with different products. And this is a wider conversation, right? So I've seen this movie before, the controversial space, an emerging market, new opportunity. I was part of the fantasy sports wave back in 2012, 2013. I tease Adam Wexler at Prize Picks about this all the time. I think I was the first person he called for investment when I was at Foxwoods. And I had the same idea. By the way, I wanted to do the same thing a year or 2 years prior. He went through the gauntlet. So did Jeremy Levine and Underdog. They had a great idea. They executed, and it was painful. Same with Jason Robbins, Nigel, et cetera, people at FanDuel, DraftKings. They really went through it. Probably a third wave here, right? But as an emerging space, you're often only as strong as your weakest link. So I think it's fair to say that, with all of these players in the market, some of them have experience in regulated gaming. Some of them know what best practices are. Some of them don't. So if everybody gets caught in the same dragnet, to the extent there is a dragnet, I think different groups are going to have different kinds of risk exposure. For our part, having seen this movie before and knowing how to operate best practices in a regulated gambling environment, even though this is not a gambling product, a lot of the tenets are still super important for consumer protection and so on. You can avoid a lot of the pitfalls that you might see from more inexperienced operators. So I'm pretty confident that, High Roller is in a really great position to be a long-term leader in gaming, not just in the United States, not just in prediction markets, but globally, particularly as we have no debt. We've been growing, in a pretty careful way, and we do have experience. It does matter.
Seth, tell me to shut the F up if need be here. But you just said that what this is not a gambling product. Are we splitting hairs, or do you truly believe that it's not a gambling product?
It's not a gambling product. It is it's a financial instrument. Like you're trading contracts. It's a CFTC regulated product. You could say the same thing about fantasy sports. Is it betting on something? Sure. You're making a real money wager. You're risking something of value to gain something of value. But from a legal perspective and a technical reading of the law and regulation, it's not a gambling product. Like, this is not my opinion. It's just a fact.
So, you said earlier that, a student of gaming and the law, you are confident that the myriad of lawsuits that are ongoing right now, and I'm sure the more to come, and a potential Supreme Court, at one point, you think this all holds up?
It's impossible to say what happens with the U.S. government, but here's why I think this is interesting. PASPA which was the law that was repealed by the Supreme Court to enable states to create their own sports betting regulations, was decided but as a states' rights issue in many ways. And this conversation we're having now about the mechanics of prediction markets versus, states' rights, it's Con Law 101. So I think this probably does go to the Supreme Court. It's, who knows? Like, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a law school dropout, but I'm consuming everything about this. I've consumed things about this for years, right? It's so hard to say, but we have seen over at least my 20 years in the gaming business is that when something is big enough, the government gets involved. That's not just the United States. That goes for everywhere. And it's normal. I think the challenge is contending with two different kinds of government. You sometimes have a government that will step in the interest of consumer protection. And sometimes you have a government that will step in the interest of money for the government. And that's just regulation in a nutshell. You see different models in different states and different countries. And, who's to say what happens next? As somebody that is very business pro capitalism, but also pro consumer protection, you hope that a government or regulatory body steps in for consumer protection. Right. And you hope to be collaborative with the people that are making the law. You have a governing structure that is actually thoughtful and allows a business to be a business. Sometimes that's not always the case.
You stepped on a great question I was going to have for you. I was going to say, poli-sci major at Brandeis. And then my next question after that was, when did you decide to not be a lawyer?
Here's a little secret. I actually always wanted to be a politician. I was always fascinated with the law. It just was always super interesting to me. I would argue with my mother relentlessly nonstop when I was a kid. She said you should probably be a lawyer. And where I'm from, you could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a failure. And I hated needles, so why not? But at some point, how do I say this? The gaming industry is so dynamic. The characters within the gaming industry are so dynamic. I got sucked into it, and it's not, you work every day. But for me, this is something else. Like, it really does come from a place of passion. I love the gaming business. I love the opportunity to be innovative and do interesting things in the context of interesting law sometimes. And yeah, for me, this is super interesting.
How did you get sucked into it?
Through poker many years ago, frankly. I used to be an athlete in high school, and I can count a couple of times where my life took a hard fork one way or the other. One was an injury in high school that sort of killed my ambition to play lacrosse at a D1 level, which is my first love. So I ended up at Brandeis. Created there an interest. This was the early days of the internet, and I loved being a little hacker when I was 11, 12. I was a gamer. We created an internet law course track, effectively internet law major. So my major was political science, but minors were computer science and internet studies, which was brand new. We built that, right? So Brandeis had more or less told me my senior year, if you apply here, we're going to let you in, you can sign your thing. And we did that. And then I chased a girl to study abroad in London. I wasn't quite ready to break up with her. And I wasn't very worldly at the time. I think it's fair to say, like, even naive would be a great word for it. And I realized pretty quickly I couldn't actually afford to live there when I was over there. I didn't really have any money. So I started playing cards. And I ended up getting quite lucky over a few months, made a fair amount of money, partied my face off in Europe. 20, 21-year-old. It was an amazing time. But I met a lot of interesting people and ended up getting into the business side of it. In the early days, it was super compelling, super fascinating. And one thing just kind of snowballed into another.
Yeah, it's wild. Talk about PointsBet for a second. So I'm in New Jersey. PointsBet was, if not in the days after PASPA's, got struck down, and it was soon one of the first sports books that opened up here, and it had a product that nobody else had, was the points betting product, where you could, for those of you who don't know or don't remember, I could say LeBron James, 20 points. I could keep going up, and it was multipliers. My memory's going along with everything else, but that's the gist of it. What do you think? It didn't make it in the end, despite having, as I said, something truly unique and original that when I was betting at the time, not a day when, if I was interested in making a bet, I was always looking at PointsBet in addition to wherever, not necessarily for the odds, just to see what those PointsBet multipliers are going to be. What American audiences weren't ready for it? What do you make of it?
It's a really good question. I think that product in particular, I loved. Right. I remember pretty early on, I think it was a Dolphins-Ravens game. We had somebody win like millions when the Ravens, I can't remember which way it went. I think the Ravens set like a single season record in a game for how many points they scored. It escapes me, but the better that we had like piled on to whatever the winning side was. And that was a great highlight of what that product could be. I think the thesis there was, and again, like it's been a while, but it was, this is a good product that's maybe focused more towards financial centers. Because it was like trading an option almost in gambling form. But New York didn't have sports betting. Chicago didn't have it for some time. And then it did, but like a minute, nothing in California, nothing like Miami. And so the markets that it was in, maybe it just didn't resonate as much, or people just didn't understand it as much. It's just not living it day to day. But yeah, it was super cool. If you were going to bet with a mechanic like that, you had to have a PointsBet account.
Yeah. You mentioned lacrosse earlier. My son plays lacrosse. He's 16. I was introduced to it through him about 4 or 5 years ago now. I'm a little surprised that professional lacrosse has not become like at least as popular as the NHL. I'll put it that way. Because it's fast. It's violent. I don't know. What am I missing here? Why hasn't it taken off? There's a question for you. Another unanswerable.
You know what? Your guess is as good as mine, but it holds such a special place in my heart. Actually, if you really want to know how I ended up getting into like business in general, if at all, I loved lacrosse. I played ever since I was, I think, 10 years old. It was my ticket to college, effectively. You remember the New York Saints? It's a now defunct professional lacrosse team. I'm looking for my keys on my desk, but I still have the Saints keychain. I used to own nysaints.com and newyorksaints.com, and as most 12-year-olds do, by going in, and I ended up trading it for my cousin and I, who actually worked for the NLL for a long time and actually stood up the Israeli national lacrosse team. He's still in the business of lacrosse so many years later. He took a job in the front office. I took a job in the back office. And my coach was a guy named Gordon Purdy, who played for the team. And that was interesting, right? We traded the domain. We started working. I actually have the team pictures hung up in my hallway. I'm in one of them. I love that sport. TV. It's all about TV.
I think it's waiting for the one big star, that just kind of breaks through, and ends up on Saturday Night Live or something. Back to the prediction markets, there was something I wanted to mention. You're on the board of Kinebridge, yes?
No longer on the board. I'm on the advisory board, but I was on the board for some time, yeah.
As we were talking earlier about your views on gambling versus option market, what is and what is not gambling, where does like responsible gambling fall in with the prediction market world? Because it's not gambling, if we're going to say that. And, when I go to buy, 100 shares of Citicorp or whatever, there's not, don't buy more than you can afford, warnings like attached to it. So is there room for RG messaging in a non-gambling product? I'm couching my words here.
I think there's room for RG messaging in anything that involves real money for anybody that is having trouble with their guardrails. This is an issue I'm particularly passionate about. It's why I invested in Kindbridge in the first place. It's why I was on the board. I'm still a member of the advisory board. Maybe you saw recently High Roller signed non-binding LOI, but we're making the deal with Kindbridge to look after RRG in Ontario. No matter what one may do, there's a small subset of the population or somebody engaging with anything that's going to go too far with it. Any product that we put out is a product we would like people to enjoy responsibly. It's still entertainment, by the way. People forget this. It's meant to be an entertaining product. Yes, you can win. Yes, we can win. Yes, the math for casino games is in the favor of the house. Doesn't mean you're going to lose all the time. It just means if you keep playing, the house is going to win, right? It's a fact. It's why you have disclosures. Responsible anything is super important. I don't want to conflate, gambling with something like porn addiction, but that's a thing that Kindbridge can treat. It's super important. I remember having a conversation really early on in the daily fantasy sports days, think like 2013, about the importance of compliance and consumer protection instead of a grow at all costs sort of operating methodology. And to be honest, this is where, business I was involved with at the time, Star Fantasy Leagues, failed where others succeeded. We focused too much on compliance in the context of a growth market. Now, I don't have a problem with that, right? I feel like doing things responsibly is really important. But it does beg the conversation was around, well, this is not a gambling product. Why would we have gambling messaging or responsible gambling messaging? So I think the nuance is important, but I think the premise shouldn't be ignored.
Speaking of gambling and casino prediction markets, more than one person in the space has floated the idea of prediction markets diving into predict whether, this random number generator between 0 and 38 is going to spit out a 3 on the next spin for buy that 2.79 cents, sell it at 3 cents, whatever. Is that something that you see coming down the pipe, or is that?
Well, how much time do you have, Jeff? Well, it's funny, actually. So I remember when prediction markets were sort of coming out more publicly and starting to make some of the trade news here and there, before it was as big as maybe it is today. And I remember turning around to a couple of very trusted colleagues. I like to create, and said, I think online poker is actually legal nationwide now. And they said, why? Well, if you look at the mechanics of prediction market, you're betting on a binary outcome, right? Or you're trading contracts on a binary outcome. So Jeff, if you and I were to play heads up poker and I say, okay, I bet yes, I choose yes, I am going to win this hand. And you choose yes, you're going to win this hand. One of us has to lose. It's a binary outcome. And the odds change based on the amount of chips that are in the middle, right? Probabilities of winning a hand change on the cards that we have and how we play. And I guess technically you could find a way to make that work within prediction market mechanics. Same thing with a slot machine. If I say, hey, I'm going to put $5 on this outcome that the reels will align in such a way where I should theoretically be returned more than $5, that's interesting. If the reels align in such a way where I'm returned $3, I actually win 0. But if it returns $5.01, maybe I win 30 based on the long-term math that's assigned to whatever that is, if you're picking up what I'm putting down. And I do think we're going to see a raft of products come out like this. And this is where it becomes even more interesting, right? Because you get into something that is still defensibly, potentially legal, if not subjective, but definitely controversial and definitely starts intersecting with politics on a state-by-state basis. And so what does that mean for the space? Does it accelerate conversations? Does it accelerate, the adoption of very specific rules and guardrails? Maybe. But in ambiguity or, lacking specific guidance, I think what we can all agree that we've seen over the last 20 years has been people driving Mack trucks through it.
That's for sure. Without giving away, the secrets that you keep in the notebook that I'm sure you have somewhere, what's next on the horizon in the gaming space?
I could speak with my hat on and hat off for High Roller. For High Roller, we're definitely heads down and executing. We have a lot to do. The capital that we raised is super transformative relative to where we were. And we have a great opportunity. We're not going to squander it. We're super, super excited about our future. I guess in the context of High Roller as well, super interesting. A lot of our investors, a lot of our execs, board members, very people within the market have very interesting portfolios in their own right of interesting products. I got to stop doing this, but I often introduce myself as somebody that isn't that smart, but knows a lot of people. I have a huge network. I do, right? And I would contend that some of the folks that are around me have the same. And it's conducive to seeing really interesting early stage ideas. When you have been in the market for some time and you can play a bit, this again, my opinion, but I feel like, let me take a step back actually. Jeff, if you asked me what I knew 10 years ago, I would have told you everything. If you asked me what I knew 5 years ago, I would have said nothing. But if you ask me now, I might tell you that I know a little bit something. I know something, enough about a lot of things where you can play chess or really see the forest for the trees. And from a product perspective, from a product market fit perspective, from discerning a fad versus a trend, from seeing real opportunity versus noise, I think that's where, after 20 years, I can really hang my hat and say, I'm good at this one. And the people around me were good at this. And for my part, I've always been vindicated by time. I haven't missed, and I don't intend to start now. So what happens next? There are a couple products I have my eyes on. A couple of different things are super unique. I think AI is really changing the world. We have a lot up our sleeve, and there's a lot on my desk, but I can't tell you what they are.
Speaking of sleeves, your right arm keeps popping up. Am I seeing a lot of ink there? Look at that.
You sure are. Somebody passed a comment. I might be the only public market CEO with a full sleeve, and I'm not sure if that's true, but I like it.
Probably one of the few. Anything on there specific that we can talk about? What was your first tattoo?
That I definitely can't tell you about. No, no, it's like I have a matching one with my cousin on my back from a very long night when we were both 21 in New York City. He's my half brother. I learned recently, by the way, that twins having kids, it makes him my half brother, not my cousin. This was like a new revelation.
Twins having kids makes him your half brother. Is that for real?
Mother and her sister are twins, and so grew up as my cousin, but actually my half brother. So yeah, he's also like one of my closest friends in the world, and grew up together. We have that. But yeah, lots of tattoos.
All right, we'll use the old, so I'll always leave them wanting more. We'll let our listeners have to wonder about the story that led to that back tattoo with your cousin half brother. Now it'll irritate me for a few days, but I'll get over it.
That's okay. I'll tell different versions of the story to different people, so you keep on wondering what's true.
Wonderful. Seth, thanks so much for taking the time. Great conversation. And I'd say good luck, but I'm starting to have a feeling that you don't need it. I'll save it for someone who needs it.
Thank you so much. No, I'll take all the luck. I'll use my one time here. Thank you. Thank you.